Awesome. Okay, hello everyone. So this is an issue refinement session of the Static Site Editor team. And today we are going to be talking about researching and evaluating one of the editors. Well, we are going to evaluate one of the editor alternative that we are looking at to replace our current WYSIWYG editor in the Static Site Editor. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So a little bit of context. We've we've been evaluating we've been looking at some editor alternatives because after the time that we've been developing the Static Site editor, we've noticed that the WYSIWYG editor that we are using right now, Toast UI, does not satisfy some of the technical requirements that we have. So in a previous refinement session, we created this evaluation matrix where we defined some technical requirements and UX requirements. We defined also an evaluation criteria for each requirement. So the idea is that we're going to use this session to fulfill or work on some of the evaluation criteria for a specific editor. In this case today, we are going to focus on TipTap and ProSniffer. So the idea is that we are not going through all of the evaluation criteria and the tabling order. Some of them are very easy to determine. For example, the maturity of the editor and also browser support. So I decided yesterday to do some research around all of those evaluation criteria. And what I want to do in this session is focus on two tables that are more complex from a technical point of view, and also they also have like a big significance. So those are the extensibility one, where we are going to evaluate the extensibility of the Markdown Parser and how extensible is the WYSIWYG editor that we are evaluating, and also the UX features. So we are trying to find a balance between how extensible and are the capabilities of the WYSIWYG editor, but also how many features the editor provides built-in. So we don't have to start re-implementing those features. Okay. So does anyone has an opening remark before starting?
Yes, I do. Before we get into it, is it worth just quickly having a look back at that architecture proposal that you put together a little bit higher up in the issue, and just recapping the like, where does the WYSIWYG editor fit into the overall architecture? Because it's one component of kind of like the whole solution, and maybe just kind of like doing a quick recap of that.
Sure. So first, I outlined that architecture specifically for another alternative of that is Remark and Quill.js. That is another WYSIWYG editor and a Markdown platform. But as you say, I think that it works. It provides some information about what we are trying to achieve from an architectural point of view. So first, the main problem that we have right now with our current WYSIWYG editor is that we started the Static Site editor with the goal of editing Markdown pages, and those Markdown pages are usually built with a Markdown syntax or flavor. The most usual is a common mark, that is a specification that attempts to create a an official Markdown specification. There are other flavors like the GitHub flavor Markdown that are usually supported by many Markdown parsers. But what we discovered over time is that there are static site generators that support other syntaxes. For example, in the case of a handbook that uses middleman, it uses a Markdown parser that is called Cramdown that implements some unofficial Markdown extensions. For example, defining attributes. Besides that, other static site generators also include templating syntax. Hugo has a templating syntax. In the case of middleman, it uses ERB that allows embedding Ruby syntax within a Markdown document. And in the case of Gatsby and New Nuxt, you can use React and Vue. So we discovered that the static site generator, the static site editor should support, add some sort of support for those templates. For example, it may be that we want to display a partial that is embedded within a Markdown document, or we want to hide the attribute definitions that is not a standard Markdown syntax. So this architecture that I propose here, what does is separating the WYSIWYG editor from the Markdown parser, and also it proposes to have an extensible Markdown parser. So in the case of, imagine that we start with a Markdown parser that only supports Common Mark and supports GitHub flavor Markdown. Those syntaxes, there are other syntaxes that, for example, Cramdown that have attribute definitions will not be supported by that parser. So the idea is that we can build extensions and create custom tokenizers in the parser to support those extensions and create custom nodes in the abstract syntax tree that is generated by the parser. So this is pretty much what this diagram tries to outline. So in the case of Premark, there is another Markdown parser that is not what TipTap uses. Premark usually has an ecosystem of extensions for the parser. For example, one very popular extension is the Remark MDX. MDX is an extension of Markdown that allows using React, like JSX within Markdown. So there is a package for that, and then there is a package from Matter, and a package for the table of content. That is another Markdown extension that is not supported natively within the Common Mark. So this is the first part of the architecture. We need an extensible Markdown parser. So the other part of the architecture, that is the yellow one here, is that we need an extensible WYSIWYG editor. So imagine that we are implementing image support, displaying images in the static site editor. But it turns out that the way that those images are referenced within a Markdown document, they are referenced without an absolute URL, because the static site generator, like Middleman, it provides a build system that allows generating those assets and make reference using relative URLs. So by default, the WYSIWYG editor won't be able to display those images. We need to implement a custom image view component that uses some backend service or some custom service within the front end to resolve those URLs. So here in this diagram, Quill.js is a rich content editor. It could be Prosmeter, it could be Editor.js, it could be any editor. What matters is that it has an ecosystem to bring support for other features like video support, and then we can implement our own extensions. So we want to implement an image viewer component. We want to implement a partial component. That's the idea of creating an extensible WYSIWYG editor. So any questions about that or comments?
So when we're talking about prose mirror / TipTap today, we're essentially talking about the part there which shows Quill.js and thinking about it in the terms of how it can render all of this stuff with parse and you know what its ecosystem look like in terms of allowing us to create custom extensions and use community extensions essentially.
Yes, mostly, but there are some advantages of cross mirror that will help us with Markdown, and we will look into that. But that's right. We're gonna focus on the WYSIWYG editor part.
All right. So sorry for derailing us, but I thought that was a valuable kind of like groundwork for non-technical minds like myself to have.
I completely agree, and thank you for highlighting that. I said before, I went through some of these evaluation criteria and filled them. So please, after this call or later in the week, I love to have some peer review to make sure that that I didn't judge some of those characteristics incorrectly.
So just stop on that. Maybe that feels like an action that we shouldn't miss out on. So who can commit to double checking Enrique's initial evaluations? I mean, I can definitely on the maturity one. I mean that's something that I can definitely help double check. There's going to be some other ones that will probably be better for the likes of Chad or Derek to validate.
You mean perhaps some of the more technical ones down below?
Yes. Yeah, the ones that speak to kind of like the technical, like definitely maturity and community. Like I can take an action to double check those. If you just scroll down to the other areas, license I can do as well. And then from there, I don't want to really get involved. I'll double check everything up to license.
Yeah, I can have a pass. I was taking a note. And then Enrique, if there's anything specific you'd like me to have like closer eyes on, obviously let me know as well.
Cool. Thank you, Derek, and thank you again.
Okay, I'll add
sure,
a comment
well.
comment here just as a reminder for all of us.
Okay, so before jumping into the extensibility, I want to make a quick remark about themes in the case of cross mirror and TipTap. So these editors do not provide a user interface. They have some minimal components. Let's go through first what TipTap and cross mirror is quickly. So these libraries these frameworks actually are not WYSIWYG editors per se. They are a toolkit to build a WYSIWYG editor. TipTap is built on top of cross mirror, and cross mirror what provides is a document model on top of DOM and some very basic view components to implement a WYSIWYG editor. And it provides an architecture to track changes that are introduced by the user, like typing or formatting in terms of transactions and commands. So it is a very powerful platform, but I wanna not go into delve too much into that. And then Tooltip is built on top of cross mirror, but it is still not like a full editor. So it may look confusing because you could expect TipTap to provide like something like more complete, considering that there is based already in Pros Mirror. But this is very powerful because what TipTap says is that I'm going to provide all of this functionality of handling the events on the menu. I'm going to provide, for example, let me move the Zoom toolbar elsewhere. One of my favorite demos is this one. So TipTap provides this toolbar menu component. So when you type, you can start like in a different block and format the content. But all of these icons here, the style of the font that we are using, and everything else, we should implement it ourselves. So it's like it provides a functionality, but all of what is related with the visual appearance, like the uses of the icons and how everything looks, is something that we should implement from scratch. And I think that's an advantage because we don't have to fight against some default styles. We just need to provide all of these things, and all of the functionality of the interaction is already implemented for us.
What is the perceived effort of implementing these kind of like toolbars and their themes themselves? You know, my gut reaction is that it's like not a big complex thing, and it's mostly visual, so on. So even though TipTap doesn't provide you with like the UI components for this, like I don't feel like it doesn't seem to be a big cost to implement that ourselves. Is that a fair assumption?
It is a very fair assumption. So imagine that what is difficult of implementing of this menu is that you have to place the floating menu on the line where you are typing. That is implemented by TipTap. And then look at the code for that example. So we have a button. Look, we have the floating menu component. And then we just need to add a button and style it. And if it is active, they provide the API to indicate that it's active. And then they also provide a command API and interface to just call that API when the button is clicked. So all of this is very simple. GitLab UI already provides, for example, a Markdown type scale that we can just use here. GitLab UI already provides an icon library and an icon component that we can also use here. So it should be like very straightforward to reuse and mix and match all of that.
So the plumbing is there. We just need to put the pretty layer over it.
That's right.
Okay.
My gut feel, and I said this in one of the comments above, is that in general, this is a good approach. The more decoupled and cohesive we make these parts, and the individual cohesive parts being really powerful, like TipTap looks to be, is going to be a big win in the long run. Because to John's question, the perceived effort, it seems like the perceived effort is pretty low, but the real effort is, as we've seen with the other one we're trying to currently use, is when it doesn't do something that you want, trying to make it do that. And that's what can just suck weeks and weeks. Whereas if you have the low-level primitives to do what you want, as long as you're proficient in the language and ecosystem, you can make it do it pretty straightforward and have it very stable and robust by testing it.
Yes, I completely agree. It's like it is not providing something out of the box, but it's like giving you the right balance between an open platform, an ecosystem, and some features are almost built in. It's just like a very easy to use API to build a WYSIWYG. Okay, so that was the comment on theming, and okay, let's go with extensibility. So as I mentioned before, our main goal with extensibility is having a way first of extending the Markdown parser. So I have a comment about the Markdown parser and about cross-mirror. So I'm gonna find an example of cross-mirror that does something in the most basic way of providing a WYSIWYG interface and a raw Markdown interface like we do in the site editor. So they have this small example, where you can switch between raw and WYSIWYG mode, but it's very ugly. But the cool part is that cross-mirror has a Markdown package that is called cross-mirror Markdown. So I'm gonna open this. And let's look at it. So the idea is that this package has two classes. It has a Markdown parser and a Markdown serializer. And the idea is that in the Markdown parser, when a parser takes a raw file, Markdown file, it converts all of those Markdown elements into an abstract syntax tree. And that tree contains nodes, and those nodes have a specific type. For example, there is a node that has a type heading, or a node that has a type list item. So this Markdown parser of cross-mirror is extensible in the sense that it uses Markdown as a default tokenizer. Markdown is also a very popular Markdown parser that renders by default to HTML. So the idea is that they use Markdown to convert the raw Markdown to an abstract syntax tree. And then you have to provide a map of objects where you say, hey, this node of the Markdown abstract syntax tree corresponds to a node of the cross-mirror document model. So I don't know if you took a look at the cross-mirror guide, and they have this information about the document model. But the idea is that cross-mirror doesn't work directly with HTML. What they say is that HTML is it is very flexible, and you have many ways of achieving the same thing. So they have this document model built on top of HTML, where you indicate, hey, we have this node of type paragraph, and that node of type paragraph will have a content that consists of inline text, or it can consist of images and other things like that. So the idea of the Markdown parser, of the cross-mirror Markdown parser, is that it easily allows you to map a node of the Markdown abstract syntax tree to a node of the cross-mirror document model. By default, this library provides a default Markdown parser where they do some mapping of the common mark spec to the most basic cross-mirror document model. So what I see us doing is that we will want to implement some support for non-standard Markdown syntaxes, like attribute definitions, reference definitions, table of contents. We can use Markdown to identify those non-standard syntaxes. They have some plugins that are already implemented, for example, tables, strike-through, and a lot of other plugins that are implemented by the community. We just need to specify, hey, cross-mirror, those node types, they are going to map to some cross-mirror node types that are implemented here. Or we can say, hey, they are going to map to some of the node types that are implemented by TikTok.
And Enrique, how would this, for example, handle wrapper templating languages like ERB or Go or others? Would that be extensible at this Markdown level or somewhere else?
Yes, we will have to implement a Markdown tokenizer to identify the ERB syntax. And then that tokenizer will convert that ERB syntax into a node of the abstract syntax tree and we will have to implement a pros mirror node, to render that ERB node as we want.
Is there anybody in the community that's done similar things, like for Hugo or Ruby or anything?
No, the only example that I've seen of doing something like that is with MDX, that is for Gatsby. So let me go up here a little bit. So one of the more attractive things about Remark is that Remark is used by Gatsby, and it is used by Netlify to implement MDX support. So there are packages to support this syntax, but I don't think there is support to implement ERB or Hugo templating syntax. So we will have to implement that.
Sorry, I have to ask, where does pros mirror, tip tap, and markdown it fall into this architecture diagram?
So markdown it is this part.
Yeah.
Pros mirror is this part.
Okay. And so we would basically then create plugins for Markdown it to handle non-Markdown syntax.
That's right. So there will be packages that support some Markdown syntaxes like table of content, but then I don't think that we will find packages to support the templating syntax of the static site generators, like Hugo and Minimal.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of put another way is we would be able to extend Markdown it in this particular example such that, like, so right now we create custom renders, whereas we just let however it was parsed be as it is, which is a shortcoming. And for example, the table of contents cram down is basically just a paragraph, but then we parse it, so we know it's a paragraph, but then when we render it, we do something special with it. And we have a bunch of custom renders to handle those weird scenarios where it was identified as a paragraph typically, but we then now parse that special paragraph to see if it's kind of a unique style paragraph, and then we have a custom render. The difference with this is that we are able to identify it upstream that it's a proper type and have like a first class type, so that we don't have to do that kind of hacky thing downstream. And then, and correct me if I'm wrong, Enrique, it sounds like we're also gonna define the node itself so that it can do just a mapping for us kind of automatically.
You are completely right. So we are gonna do this package, this is Markdown. So this Markdown, pros mirror Markdown, we are gonna customize the Markdown to identify upstream those custom syntaxes. We are going to assign a node type. We are going to, set all of the correct metadata. And then we are going to say, hey, map this node type to a pros mirror node. And in the serializer, we are going to do the opposite. We're going to say, hey, take this pros mirror node, and it represents this node type in the Markdown as a syntax tree.
Cool. Yeah, I think obviously we'll want to test, like, this sounds awesome. Obviously we will definitely want to test it on like one of our unique cases and like see what that experience is like, right, before we go all in. I think it's probably worth doing that. Maybe you've already done that, I don't know, but that's obviously something we want to test. It sounds good, but it's just like, what is it, how good is that experience end to end?
I'm gonna show you. I created a demo of supporting ERB syntax with the Refinement Parser. So let me show you. Hopefully,
Enrique's like, well, I just happen to have a demo.
He's actually behind the scenes. Enrique's actually already like built this whole thing. He's just waiting for us to approve it so he can push the merge request.
Works for me.
I say, yes, Enrique, we agree with you. Thank you, new select editor. Let's see if I can find it though. It says 18 years ago, 18 days ago, 18 years ago. No, no, it's not this one. So I wasn't planning to show this because this was like just being playing with Quill on Unified.
That's fine. We can share it after, like for the sake of time. But yeah, I definitely want to check that out, see what that end-to-end experience is like.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I gonna share the demo later. I don't know if I share it around here, but I'm gonna just share it in on the Slack. But the cool thing about the demo is that it demonstrates how we implement a tokenizer in a parser to identify the custom syntax, and we convert that into a node in the WYSIWYG. So yes, that's Markdown. So
And it seems like we should be able to look at Remark if they do similar things for inspiration, because it's the same basic architecture and thing that they've accomplished, but just in a different framework.
yes, when I was considering if we can change Markdown it for Remark, because that will give you MDX support out of the box.
That's actually what
And
it
I
sounded
think-
like you were initially saying. That's how I interpreted it, actually.
Yeah, and I think that supporting Gatsby and supporting Nodes will be, I guess, that our next goal, right? In supporting SISI generators. So having that package available for us will speed up that process. Okay, so the second part is allowing implementing WYSIWYG editor extensions. So this one is supported by CodeMirror in three ways. First, they have the concept of decorations, and the concept of decorations is basically creating a view component where you say, hey, add these attributes to a DOM element within the editable part of the view part of the WYSIWYG editor. And then they have also the ability of implementing node views. And a node view basically is that so you say, hey, this node of type image, you are going to use this component to render it. And then you can do, you can implement however you see fit the render of that component. This one in particular, I think is a good match for us because we are going to end up doing something like this. We're going to create an image view component and we are going to do some custom rendering process to render images with URLs that we have to resolve in a different process.
See that it is aware of position. That seems really useful for problems like we had cursor positioning and such.
Yes. Any more comments about or remarks about the accessibility part?
How does how's the documentation for so will we be using TipTap or Prose Mirror straight up?
That's a good question. I think that we should use TipTap, but I have concerns with TipTap. For example, one of the things that I noticed while evaluating the maturity of the library is that it doesn't have a robust text suite. And most of the extensions are contributed by the community, but they are not contributed with a test specification. But I think that if we don't do that, we will have to, the cost of development will increase dramatically. So I think that we can start with TipTap. We can try to find a way of finding some way of decoupling from that library, and understanding that below that we are relying actually on Prosemeter to build it. And there are other aspects like the collaboration component that is handled by Prosemeter. I don't know if I said this before, but TipTap implements a completely new document schema. What I mean by that is that Prosemeter defines a document model on top of them, and you have to define a schema like where you say, hey, we have this type of nodes, and they have this, and they allow this kind of relationships. So TipTap implements a whole new schema, and we will have to implement code to match the Markdown offset syntax tree to TipTap's document model. Right? I think that we should start with TipTap. I think that it's going to make us more productive. So far,
So one of the things when I was reading up on this stuff last night was that, so yes, tests. So I found issue 547 in TipTap's GitHub repo, which speaks about TipTap version 2. And how they've started in December last year, they started working on version 2, so which is a complete rewrite of TipTap. They're going to be rewriting in TypeScript, and they talk about tests and so on. I guess my concern is it feels like they've realized some limitations of their current kind of like architecture or design or whatever, and they want to make it good, but we don't. There's no clarity on the roadmap, and there's also. So I guess that the part that I'm uncomfortable with TipTap is they're likely going to be changing things drastically soon. Who knows how drastic? I don't know exactly. From what I can read, it doesn't look like it's massive drastic. It looks mostly refactoring type of things. But they're definitely introducing new features and so on. And so when we make it makes me uncomfortable making a commitment to a library that I know is likely going to change soon, and where they acknowledge on the current version, there isn't. Well, they do say that they've got functional tests, but they don't have end-to-end tests, for instance, on the library. Now, if they mention they've got some functional tests, not good coverage. So TipTap feels like, yes, I understand that it brings us a lot of plumbing that we would have to do ourselves if we didn't use it. But how? Are we building on top of something that is going to be stable and robust for a long time? Like, are we going to have to re-architect something when they do version 2 and they stop supporting version 1 because for whatever reason they made fundamental changes? I mean, they're talking about rewriting it in TypeScript, and so I expect they're not going to be maintaining version 1 for much longer. Once, who knows when version 2 hits? I mean, it's been a while. In terms of for me the part that I like, Prosemeter seems to have very good support, commercial support, even even though it's an open source project, it's got great commercial support. My worry is that TipTap is kind of like this labor of love from this company called Uberdosis, who needed a view editor, and they kind of like, I don't see any other apart from community contributions. I don't see anybody else really committing to TipTap in the sense of we're going to make sure that there's continued development and something a little bit bigger than just community contributions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I have the same conflict. For me is that on one hand, we have ProseMeter that is an editor toolkit. It will force us to implement a lot of basic functionality, and that is custom. And then we have TipTap that implements most of the functionality that we need. But then it has like this very dubious support. It has really, literally, they say that they have functional testing, but let me show you. Look at the commands library. They don't have any kind of testing support here. And if you open any of these packages, you'll see that the only package that has a test specification is this one, the core component. And it only has one spec file.
Yeah, so I think when I look at something like Quill.js, I mean, I might be wrong, but I feel like I have more a higher sense of trust in kind of like this thing is around, it's being used by other companies, and that it feels just a little bit more robust in terms of a WYSIWYG editor. Now, I don't know if it's built on what it's built on, if it's a straight kind of like if it uses Prosemirror or anything, or where it fits into our thing. It just feels a little bit more reliable to depend on it than TipTap, for instance.
I completely agree. The problem that I found with Quill, even though it is stable, it has a robust test suite, is that they have years without publishing a new update. There are several issues open that are asking about the development and roadmap, because it feels very abandoned.
Okay, yeah, I see here the last update was over a year ago, which isn't great either. When you have 55 pull requests open and not a lot of activity on them, that's not great either.
What do you think about the idea of, this was a good for this session to talk about Prosemirror and TipTap. I'm still a little bit vague on the mapping of both of those libraries to the others. What if we converted this into a spreadsheet format where we can have all of these criteria for multiple different things and be able to look at them side by side, and in addition to future things that we look at if we do?
Yeah, let's do that. I actually converted that matrix in the issue description to these multiple tables, but a spreadsheet is definitely a better representation of this idea. So yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, it's like I'm still vague on the split between TipTap and Prosemirror, and like what part of that would be replaced by Remark, or what part we would have to build from scratch if we didn't use TipTap and used Prosemirror directly, I guess would be another completely different option to compare.
So what TipTap implements that we will have to implement if we use Prosemirror directly. Let me see if I find the TipTap page. So there are some components that we will have to implement. For example, this floating menu component is something that we will have to implement. They provide 3 different types of floating menu. This is something also that we want to implement, that we would like to implement in the style-side editor, if I remember correctly. This type of contextual formatting menu. And they implement a different, this is the 3rd type of menu. So this is a functionality that we will have to implement from scratch that TipTap already provides. Also the shortcuts here. So they have these, let me see.
So I'll rephrase my question to you, Enrique. I like what TipTap brings to the table. What, say for instance, I mean, nothing in that issue that I read points to drastic external changes. That external being the API they surface for and how you use it. But how? Say for instance we run into challenges with TipTap. What is our alternative if we want to replace TipTap with something else and still keep our Prose Mirror and the rest of our architecture in place? Do we have an alternative to TipTap? Is it about us having to roll our own kind of like functionality on top of Prose Mirror? Because my initial searches didn't really kind of like show too many Vue WYSIWYG editors that's built on top of Prose Mirror. TipTap is pretty much the one that is by far the most popular one. The rest doesn't seem to be maintained at all.
I'm just going to add on top of that. That's actually a thought I had. Like, I don't know how crazy this is. Like, what if we use Slate? Like, it sounds like TipTap is basically Vue's response, the Vue community response of having Slate, which is React's solution. Like, again, just for what it's worth, I don't know if that's a good idea, bad idea. Obviously, that sucks in that it's not Vue anymore and it'd be React. Another thing to consider is Slate looks like it's actually in beta, so I don't know how, reliable it is. I mean, we're just in a situation where, we have to move forward, and like the most ideal tool doesn't exist is basically kind of where we're at. So I definitely understand the concerns, right? Like of TipTap and it being, especially if they're going to a V2, I share that same concern. I think we all do. It's like, yeah. So anyway, just a high level idea was maybe Slate is even an option, even though it's in React and not Vue. I don't know.
To take a shot at answering John's question, so if we did go with TipTap, and like as far as the rewrite in TypeScript, that seems less scary to me than like they're redesigning their API. That mostly seems like they just want to clean up their code, have type safety, and do that. I didn't see what their roadmap is. We should look closer, but if they're not necessarily redesigning the API, I'm less concerned about that. But even if they do, the fact that it's barely decoupled and an isolated layer, and like Derek said, worst case down the road, maybe we say, oh, we really hate TipTap 2.0. All right, we're stuck with it. We have to fork it and then do something different. The fact that we have this decoupled approach means that, okay, we need to shim something else on top of Prose Mirror, whatever that is, but what we've done in TipTap is still going to work for the time being while we cross that bridge if we ever have to come to it down the road. So I'm, from that perspective, less concerned about committing to TipTap if it does what we want right now.
Yeah,
mostly.
For me, it's just about, whatever option we go with, it has a risk. For what I'm trying to calculate in my mind is how big is the risk? What does our safety net look like? And that is, that's one of the parts we need to evaluate. It's not a deal breaker in and of itself, in total. Ultimately code is code, and if we have to, we can write our own code, but we don't want to because we want to leverage the power of the community. The 40 plus people contributing to the project is exponentially more effective than the 4 or 5 of us that work on it. And so I just want to make sure that it's my job to ask the risk questions, and because committing two milestones to re-architecting a system, it's not going to look good if in 2 milestones after that we say like, oops, we need to actually go and do something different again. And so we need to, with a fair sense of confidence. There's no guarantees in anything, but with a fair sense of confidence, we need to know that what there is here is fundamentally solid enough for us to build on, and for us to rely on for a foreseeable time down the future. I think the fact that TipTap is the only Prosemirror kind of like base view extension does seem to have high usage. I mean, in that issue, they talk about 200,000. I mean, this is now a year ago, almost 200,000+ downloads a month of the library. So it definitely seems to be well used. There is an active community that we can see. There's pull requests, there's issues, and there's conversation on those issues. So that in itself kind of like mitigates some of that concern. I guess that it's never nice when you don't have a clear alternative to be able to go to. And in this case, we don't seem to have a clear alternative. I will highlight that another GitLab team member previously actually worked with TipTap and tried to make it work as part of the editing experience with issues for the editor, and they got close to it, just never had to see it through. So TipTap it's definitely not the first time it's been considered in the context of GitLab. So it's not a controversial decision.
Yeah, perhaps we can have please go ahead, Derek.
I was just gonna say we should chat with that person or persons to learn the plus minus of what they went through. Like that's a huge.
You actually know that person, Derek. It's Dawa.
Oh, okay, nice. Sweet. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say
I'll find that issue.
Besides that, a third alternative is identifying if we can use a subset of TipTap, because what TipTap provides is a custom document schema that works well with the visual components that they provide. So perhaps an option is like just adopting those visual components, but not the document schema, because we know that what is robust and is stable and is feature proof is Prosemirror, not TipTap.
Yeah.
To sort of mitigate the concerns Jean said about future proofing, we could do a spike and say like, how hard would it be to just try to minimally get Slate working on top of Prosemirror, or to just have how coupled is the API between TipTap and Prosemirror? Is it pretty loose where you can plug something else in, or is it really tight where it would be, weeks of work to make something different work? And just answer that question in general. If the answer is, yeah, it's pretty loose, so it would be not hard to switch something out, then there's less risk.
I just want to, I mean, I don't want to dismiss any options, but I'll be hard pressed to be convinced to bring in a React-based editor into our ecosystem. It's from a maintainability point of view, it just doesn't feel right to introduce another. And I'm sure we'll have maintainers throwing their arms as well at that. So it's just another thing we need to learn on top of what we're doing.
I agree with that. I would never say they'll use it permanently. I meant just as an example of something that exists and is written in JavaScript. How hard would it be to make that work on top of Prosemirror?
Yeah, and again, we're on the same page. Again, I was just thinking outside the box, right? It's like, what if, I mean, that's really what it was, is from my understanding, it's the Vue flavored version of Slate, which is, and again, I know very little about it, but like the go-to wrapper on top of Prosemirror for React. That's basically what that is. So TipTap is Vue's version of that.
I've just found those two issues or things from Dawa that I'm going to share with. Does anybody have to jump desperately that calls for us to end the call?
I'm okay staying here.
Yeah, same boat.
All right, let's do this quickly. So this is the WYSIWYG editor for wikis, was the kind of like the context, and then DAWA lost touched the editor, unfortunately. And so this is the WIP MR that he had, which introduced TipTap, and essentially, he brought it into the current kind of like Markdown editor common box. Now, if we look, you can see implementing different things.
I think at a high level, the main, and correct me if I'm wrong, the main win of like this effort is teasing apart the two pieces which are right now tied together, and that's the parsing of it, and then the actual kind of the rendering WYSIWYG editor mode, essentially. That's like the main win, and right now it sounds like Prosmere is an extremely strong base to enable that. It kind of sits in the middle in a way, but that allows us to choose whatever parser we want and then whatever editor we want. I don't know, I guess exactly where I'm going with that, other than like that's the main win of this entire effort as far as I'm concerned. And then downstream further, if we, say for example, today we had to make a decision and we went with TipTap, the sheer fact that those are now teased apart should give us more confidence than what we have now, in the sense that we can now swap out not one big piece, but just the editor itself. Again, we don't want to do that. We ideally have the winning solution right now, but we obviously don't. So it's a trade-off.
I think the one thing that we're definitely in agreement with is the architectural proposal that Enrique has. I think the four of us have commented in the issue and on this call that, that I think is definitely the right plan. I think the conversation is it Remark and Quill, or is it Prosmere and Markdown it and TipTap? That's where we're kind of like not 100% sure. And I think to answer that, we have to go through our, we have to use our evaluation criteria. We have to do the solid, we have to evaluate. I personally would like us to evaluate at least two options. It's one thing for us to evaluate Prosmere and TipTap and Markdown it against our criteria, and say, yeah, broadly it meets the criteria, we can make it work and so on. But I do think from a due diligence point of view, we have to at least have an alternative that we also evaluate, to say, we have looked at this because maybe we're surprised in our evaluation. Like a lot of the things that not one single validation is really a deal breaker, except for license, to be quite honest. That's the only kind of like black and white criteria. The license needs to be compatible. The rest, is all kind of like debatable and to various degrees of impact on our overall decision. And so I think personally, the next step is like, Enrique, you sold us on the architecture. I think your rationale behind Prosmere and Markdown, like, I'm looking at that and I'm almost like, I almost want to say, yes, let's just go and do that. But I want us to persevere and do our due diligence properly and make sure that even if we do make a mistake with our choice, like when we make a decision, if we make it based on if we make the right decision based on the data available, it was still the right decision at the time. Hindsight is 20/20. But if we do go down the line and we realize we made a mistake and we look back and we didn't do our due diligence, that is not right. And so I'd rather us take another week or two, evaluate two options and make our case then. My question then is what is the best use of our time right now together? We're all in agreement that we could probably give another 20, 30 minutes if we need to. Is it about looking at those evaluation criteria and assessing the pros mirror kind of like stack? Would that be beneficial to you, Enrique?
Could you repeat that question, please?
So if we spend another 30 minutes on this call, what would be the best use of our time right now?
Well, I think that if we want to keep evaluating alternative, it's better if we keep working as offline and sync rather than on this meeting, because we have other alternatives that we haven't evaluated yet. For example, the CKator is a very robust option as well that has a Markdown data interface that we can plug with Remark. I just haven't read about it like extensively, but I think that perhaps the next step is, as Chad said, creating that spreadsheet with all of the evaluation criteria and filling that with CKator and Remark or other type of combination.
So can we divide and conquer? Can we like, how do we go from, like, I wanna know when we leave this call, what is our clear next steps? What do we do?
One question I had is, are these ecosystems, do they need to be evaluated together as single products like ProsMirror, TipTap, Remark, and whatever the other one was? Or should we maybe do a spike to say, are these interchangeable? Could we use, ProsMirror with something else on top of it, Quill or whatever? Or are they different enough that the architectural boundaries don't match up?
I think that we can mix and match. So perhaps what we can do is list which are the Markdown parsers that we have available. Markdown it, Remark, which are the WYSIWYG, CKator, ProsMirror, Ator.js, and then we can distribute the work among ourselves to do that spike and see how we can mix and match those options.
Right. So maybe they're two separate comparison spreadsheets, the Markdown part and the editor part. And as an experiment, we could pick the best one of each of those. Maybe there's something better than TipTap, and say, well, how hard is it to make the best one work with ProsMirror? If that's what we end up with. And whether it would be weeks of work, or which means, okay, maybe we just go with TipTap, or if it would be pretty straightforward, which means we could choose the best of breed for both of them.
I think that makes sense. Obviously, however we choose to scope the spikes is really what it comes down to. But yeah, I think, and Enrique, you obviously already did this. I have not, so I just don't know. Like that's really what it's gonna. I think we're gonna learn the most when we actually try to implement and see like what snags do we hit, how smooth is this, that type of thing is a big proposal.
I want to propose that we almost create like a test criteria proof of concept, in a sense of here's a source Markdown file, and it's got some like standard common mark stuff. Maybe it's got some bad syntax, and maybe it's got some ERB code in it. And then we evaluate the different combinations of options we have, whether it's TipTap and all of those, and say, and let's define, okay, what do we want to achieve? So create a proof of concept that can render this properly in WYSIWYG mode, and or maybe at least doing equivalence of what we currently have in Toast UI. Identify the non-Markdown components and make them non-editable. Because I think doing that will allow us to understand how powerful and flexible the architecture is, that solution, and also the developer experience. Because I think we shouldn't, we never actually defined that as a criteria, but the developer experience is important as well in terms of how easy is it to find information about the API, the documentation, you know, like, do you actually, is there something that's obscure within the code that isn't documented properly that you needed to kind of like look at? So maybe that is kind of like our approach, should be our approach with this is first, let's identify our solution options, you know, like, so that's one part of it. The second, and then our proof of concept phase is we've done these solution options, we've done a rough validation on them, you know, and I think we should complete the validation criteria and assess them based on that to give us a clear indication of this is not worth doing it. You know, like CK editor is a great editor, but I have some concerns about how flexible it's going to be to allow us to do what we want to do. You know, like, and so forth. But those concerns aren't valid until we've actually done an evaluation on it. So maybe the first step is, okay, let's define our candidates and our architecture candidates. Let's put them in a spreadsheet, do a rough evaluation on them. And then let's take the top 2 or 3 and we build a proof of concept with each one of those candidates and see kind of like how the whole architecture works against our kind of like the benchmark requirement.
I agree.
Like that. Go ahead.
I agree. This is going to get into a real nitty gritty, but I think we should look forward and not ERB syntax. Like, what do we want to support and like actually do tests so it's a little bit more real in what we expect. So it's a really small detail, but something worth doing.
I think we can have probably like 1 or 2 kind of like source code files that we want to parse and render and see what the experience of that is.
Right, and it could hit like the major points we care about, like a Hugo template that has front matter and a partial and a little bit of markdown, and a middleman template that has front matter and ERB syntax and a little bit of markdown, and so possibly partials.
So to capture all of this nicely, I'm going to share my screen and write a comment up here. So next step is to find the editor candidates, and this is kind of like both the parsing and rendering components as a unit, right? Then we need to complete the evaluation criteria. Just this one. Then we need to create a concept. Well, actually, the next step is identify feasible candidates for proof of concept phase, and then create proof of concepts based on what did we say? Common. It's basically the popular static site generators and syntax and their syntax. So create proof of concept based on
essentially against markdown, flavors, and templating are kind of the main ones in front matter. Those are kind of the 3 chunks of parsing. And then really what it comes down to, at least for me downstream, is if we have custom cursor support of the editor and a way to generate UI, that's like the bare bones, I think, of what is going to enable us to have like nice UX features. It's just a matter of which ones come with that stuff pre-baked and how many of those are already done. Like TipTap was an example of a lot of that stuff already done.
By the way, the Markdown flavors are very important, but I think that taking in consideration the UX requirements is as important as well. For example, the Markdown shortcuts, the table support, understanding if we can implement that or if it is already implemented is very important.
Yeah. All right. So who's going to take ownership of defining the editor candidates? Enrique?
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good.
Completing the evaluation criteria, I think that can be the three of you.
I was gonna say, feel free to put me wherever, and Enrique, I can help you do this however, and we can split it up if that's helpful. I haven't been a part of this process much, so I'm totally game to be.
Create proof of concept. Actually, I need to first define proof of concept. What it's not this thing. What is that thing that you create as the the thing you want to test for the proof of concepts?
Spike, prototype.
Rubric,
Requirements.
criteria.
Requirement. I'll work with Eric Schurter to make sure what it is that we want to define there. So what are the top static site generators that's on his roadmap? What are the markdown syntaxes we want to support here? So he has to input in and the user experience requirement, and then create proof of concepts against requirements, against specifying requirements to evaluate technical capability and developer experience. And this will be does this seem like reasonable next steps? That was a question.
Yeah, it didn't come through.
Yes, I'm here.
Did you not hear me? So my question is, does this sound like reasonable next steps?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. Enrique, you are the DRI overall in terms of leading this effort. As we discussed, this goes into 13.5 as part of our, as part of the agreement with Eric. We said we want to rather do our due diligence properly, do some proof of concepts in 13.5 so that we make informed decisions. Our deadline essentially for making the final decision is and essentially decide on final architecture. That's going to lie with you, Enrique. You can get the input from all the team, but ultimately you're the DRI on this, and what decision you make needs to be informed, and we'll support you as a team. But somebody needs to make the final decision, and that lies with you. And our deadline essentially for making that final decision is the 17th of October. So we've got 33 days or 32 days to make that decision. And so I think there's quite a bit of work in this, and we should try and get as much done as possible. Now, we're also going on the PTO soon, so I want you to make sure that you don't just take this all on yourself. Think what you can do, so that you can take the PTO and not worry about this. Because when you come back, you're going to have a lot of work cut out for you. So you do then what you can so that you can take the proper rest as well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna try to have those candidates ready. So after I leave for PTO, we can start filling those evaluation criteria for those options.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for the time. I think that a good discussion, and I think it gives us clear next steps in terms of how we need to go about it. I also have a much better understanding of the architecture, the components of it, and how it all fits together, and that helps me, especially in conversation planning terms. So, thank you very much, and yeah, let's take it from here then.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Enrique.
everybody.
Good job bringing this all together.
Yep,
Yeah, thank you.
definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.